A 19-year-old man is now charged with murder after authorities claimed he intentionally went over 70 miles per hour, causing a 12-car crash that killed 2 people out in Las Vegas. And it's not just the evidence that may surprise you here, but the potential defense and the alleged criminal history too. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Let me tell you something. If you think the crime stories I cover are scary, wait until you hear what's happening with your personal data online. Your name, your phone number, your address, it is all out there. It is easy for anyone to find. The good news is our sponsor, Incogni, helps you disappear online. They track down where your personal information is being exposed, like on search sites or old forum posts, and they demand its removal. You know what? When I signed up, they found over 50 databases with my information, and within days, it all started coming down. Setup takes minutes. You create an account, you authorize Incogni to do the rest, and with their new unlimited plans custom removals feature, you can submit specific links and a team of privacy experts will personally remove them. So if you care about protecting yourself online, take your privacy back with Incogni. Use code SIDEBAR for 60% off of an annual plan. It's not shocking enough that a 19-year-old man has been criminally charged in connection with a 12-car crash pileup out in Las Vegas, but it is his apparent past that is now raising a lot of concern too, and potential defense he may move forward with. We're talking about Jose Gutierrez. He is accused of speeding up to 71 miles per hour in a nearly straight line, according to authorities, in a reportedly posted 45 mile per hour zone, and crashing into cars at a red light. Middle of the day, November 18th, approximately 3:29 p.m. His pregnant girlfriend, 20-year-old Adeline Duran Rincon, and another driver, 38-year-old Edward Garcia, they were killed. They died at the scene. Another victim had to be immediately taken to the hospital after suffering life-threatening injuries. By the way, apparently, the local DA indicating there is no evidence that Gutierrez tried to stop. In fact, Clark County District Attorney Steve Wolfson said, quote, "We believe, based on all the evidence to date, including a very descriptive video, that his actions were intentional," and also indicated that Gutierrez was not under the influence of drugs or alcohol. 8 News Now Las Vegas reporting he had only trace amounts of marijuana in his system. And by the way, that is despite reporting that law enforcement apparently found a marijuana vape on him, and they noted that he had these apparent bloodshot eyes. We'll talk about that. But authorities also indicate that the data from the Infiniti G37 that he was allegedly driving on West Cheyenne Avenue reportedly shows that it accelerated rapidly from 9 miles per hour within 5 seconds. Oh, and you know what I didn't even mention? What he allegedly said at the hospital to law enforcement. I want to get into that. I want to get into his charges. I want to get into his potential defense, his alleged history, and more. Let's talk about it. Okay, so let me bring in Adrian Lobo, a Nevada criminal defense attorney, to talk more about this. Thank you so much for taking the time. I want to start with the charges here. So you have this guy, Jose Gutierrez, who initially faced 4 counts of reckless driving resulting in death or substantial bodily harm. This is according to the records. On Thursday, the prosecutors upgraded his charges. So according to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, on November 20th, he was rebooked on the following charges: open murder, so 2 counts of open murder, attempted murder, and battery with use of a deadly weapon. But when you look at the court records, it also indicates that he's facing 4 counts of reckless driving, another count of attempted murder, and another count of battery. And the upgrade, I would imagine, Adrian, is because they get the blood test back. It doesn't appear that he's impaired, so they're making the argument that this was intentional murder.
It seems so with the way that the charging has occurred. Definitely. I feel like I was a bit shocked to see that it was charged as open murder. I thought maybe possibly vehicular manslaughter might be something that they would bring, but it appears that they're going to say that this was an intentional volitional act, and you can premeditate in seconds to get to a first-degree murder conviction. You also can achieve a first-degree murder conviction through a felony murder, meaning like a crime of violence. So the reckless driving and the attempted murder, they can get there through it.
Can you explain what it means when we say open murder? Because I went on the Clark County government website, and they say murder is defined by Nevada revised statutes, and they cite a statute, An open murder information or indictment charges murder in the first degree and all necessarily included offenses. These would include murder in the second degree and possibly voluntary manslaughter and involuntary manslaughter based upon the specific facts of the case. So what is open murder?
Open murder is something that we do in Nevada, meaning that they charge an open, like, homicide charge, and that the jury would get to pick, in essence, if this were to go to trial between a first-degree murder, a second-degree murder, an voluntary manslaughter, and an involuntary manslaughter. So, meaning that I presume they're going to argue that it is, I guess, a volitional, intentional act that he did this. I think that's kind of a stretch, but I think possibly they're just going to leave it open for the jury to decide, and the jury can pick from all four of those.
Well, I will get into his specific defense or potential defense in a minute. Putting that aside, you think it might be difficult to prove this was an intentional, volitional act if you look at the car speeding, if they have the data from the car that it speeds up like that, if there's no indication, touch the brake. I hear what you're saying. I think traditionally it's kind of unusual to charge somebody in these car crash cases with intentional murder like this, but you don't think that those factors would be enough to say that this was an intentional act, or at least you can understand it seems why the DA might move forward with that.
Right. And I think premeditation, it can happen in minutes. That's what we always hear in every sort of, homicide prosecution, that intent that's necessary can be formed in seconds. You don't have to have this elaborate plan, but it does seem that, was it his intention to have a suicide homicide? Because I don't know. I mean, he's going to subject himself also to that same danger as well. But as you said, there is no slowing down. And I don't know. It's very curious to see what his defense is going to be.
Well, that is what I want to get into. It's not. I'll give you, it's not brake failure. It's not there's a problem with the car, at least as of right now, which we'll talk about. But let me ask you first about his alleged statement. So, according to KTNV Channel 13, police go to the hospital after the crash. This is where Gutierrez is being treated, and they ask him, "Were you driving?" And allegedly, he first says, yes, he confirms that he was the driver. Then he later denies it, and apparently changes his story. At one point, he's asked if he was drinking before he went behind the wheel. He reportedly said the last drink that he had was the week before the crash. They ask, what about consuming marijuana? He says he didn't use any drugs in the last week, but as I mentioned, law enforcement look at his eyes. They claim they were bloodshot, they were watery, so they seemingly suspect he may not be telling the truth, especially when they get a hold of his clothes that he was wearing, and apparently they find a marijuana vape pen in a pocket. His blood is drawn for testing, and according to News 3 LV, they report that they find trace amount of basically cannabis. So this does become a question of whether or not, Adrian, look, was he impaired in some way, or is he not being honest? And I wonder if that's the bigger issue, or is he allegedly not being honest about what state he was in, the information he provided to law enforcement, and can that be used to really hurt him in an eventual case?
Right, for sure. I think there are concerns about him, changing his story multiple times. But I think one thing that I presumably is going to be fleshed out. I don't know the time period in between those two statements. I know he was treated for his own injuries, and they had talked about in that same report having trace amounts of fentanyl, but through probably the hospital administering whatever drugs to, patch him up and get him on his way. If that statement came out then, maybe some of those could be suppressible because he wasn't in his right mind, or he could offer an explanation. It just really depends on, number one, what he was treated for, the medication he was given, and was he even of sound mind to be making sense, such that the police should even be asking him questions if he's completely out of it and loopy, and if he had fentanyl in his system.
And I will tell you, there was also more bad news for him. And look, you make a good point about whether his statements were, what the legitimacy of his statements and whether or not, how he was questioned. But more bad news for him, aside from the charges that he's facing, is that when he walked into a courtroom, wearing a cast, by the way, Las Vegas Justice Court Judge Joe Bonaventure denied him bail. Now, were you surprised by that, given the circumstances of this case? What would be the rationale to deny him bail?
Well, in Nevada, we have what is called you are entitled to bail, but on any first degree sort of open murder charge, the courts have the right to deny bail for capital like cases. And I'm not surprised that he did, considering that two people were killed, another two were severely injured. And it appears that at this point, if he wasn't impaired, this is a volitional act. And Judge Bonaventure's primary concern, of course, is going to be to protect the community and make sure that he shows up. And clearly, if he's doing this and he's sober, that's even more concerning. And we do have a statute, meaning that if proof, we call proof evident, presumption great, meaning that if the proof is evident that that it's overwhelming, and the presumption is great that he will be convicted in a first degree homicide case, they can deny bail.
I have to ask you about this potential defense. So Gutierrez apparently told police that he suffers from untreated seizures. Now, the problem with that, according to authorities, is this is outlined in court documents, is they argue, well, if that was the case, the car would have slowed down, it would have decreased speed, it would have drifted off the road. We have a statement, by the way, from Gutierrez's attorney, Thomas Moskal. Jose Gutierrez has a documented history of seizures that the DA's office needs to investigate and consider before plowing ahead on a theory that this car crash was the commission of cold, calculated, premeditated murder of his fiancée who is carrying his unborn child. My office is in the process of gathering medical records. Adrian, what do you think about that, and how would they necessarily prove that?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because if there were medical records, and I do know Thomas Moskal, and I'm sure that he's going to be gathering them. And so whatever sort of medical episodes were, documented are going to be very helpful in this case. And obviously, if this was an involuntary act and he was having a seizure, I think that law enforcement saying that the car would have decelerated or his foot would have come off it, they just don't know. I mean, in a seizure sort of event, how your body is reacting. And if he's stuck there, then that is what it is. I hope that they have some sort of solid documentation, because it sounds like he was never formally diagnosed. So it's going to be critical. I'm wondering where that documentation is coming from, because if you're going to the hospital or you're at school and having this sort of medical episode, obviously the ambulance are going to be called and somebody's going to rush you to the hospital and give you, some sort of seizure meds.
Well, it's also could this, turn around to bite him? Because if it's true and he knew about it, why didn't he get the proper treatment? Why was he operating a car? I mean, couldn't this actually be used against him if the defense wants to go this route?
I mean, they could. Why didn't he get treated? I think a lot of things. First of all, I don't know about Mr. Gutierrez's background and if he's somebody who had access to good medical care, if he had insurance, if he even knew what it was. I don't know what his education level, sophistication level is. And if something goes undiagnosed and untreated, traditionally also in, communities of color, aren't apt to go to the doctors very quickly and or to even know what it is necessarily. So I think that has to be explored and developed too. And not saying that it's ignorance, but if you don't know what it is, then how can you be on the hook? But he knows something was wrong if he's having these episodes. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and look, it's an interesting defense. I guess the question becomes, would it downgrade it from murder? Would it be, hey, this is a complete accident, this is not a murder, this is not attempted murder, this is not reckless driving? Is the goal for it to be almost like an affirmative defense? He can't be charged for anything, or is it to downgrade it?
I think it's to downgrade it. And for example, if that documentation is solid and Mr. Moskal can present that to the district attorney's office, possibly there will be some sort of negotiation that I would expect for an involuntary manslaughter, if that's a possibility. And so meaning that this was through an act that he didn't have control over. Maybe it's a voluntary, maybe it's used to negotiate to get him down. So that way he doesn't have to go to trial. But I think it's a stretch, just as Mr. Moskal put it, that he had a plan to plow through an intersection with his girlfriend who's, pregnant, and there was no signs that he was wanting to get rid of her and the child. It seems like that's a big stretch to make that he would be willing to do that without some sort of motive.
I want to ask about his past and how that might factor into this case in some way. So first of all, authorities say that the DMV records show he wasn't driving a car that was registered to him during the crash. It was a car registered to the mother of his girlfriend. Again, the girlfriend who was killed in the collision. Now, there are people who might be saying, that's strange that he's driving that car. Well, let's explore that a little bit, because we may not know the exact circumstances of why he was apparently driving that car, but here's what we do know. According to reporting from KTNV Channel 13, court records show he received a speeding ticket last month after he was going 52 in a 35-mile-per-hour zone. 8 News Now reporting that he told the officer who stopped him that, "This is my girlfriend's car." The officer writes him a $150 ticket, and he was scheduled to appear in court in January to pay it off. Back in September, he is accused of crashing into an elderly woman. Now, the woman's son, unidentified, told KTNV that Gutierrez hit into his mom's car after allegedly running a stop sign with her car being destroyed. She has to go to physical therapy, according to the son. The son saying, quote, "She never even had a ticket or been in an accident. She's doing her physical therapy, takes her walks around the park, but it's not the same. I told him that I had been in these types of situations before. Fender benders, they do happen. Just please take your time and drive safe from here on, because the next time it could really affect somebody." And after this new deadly crash, this son called on lawmakers in Nevada to implement stricter policies for repeat driving offenders. In April, Gutierrez was apparently arrested for allegedly intimidating a public officer who responded to a call about a woman claiming she was attacked by a man. And Gutierrez reportedly says to this officer, "I'll bleeping shoot you and I'll kill you." 8 News Now providing a bit more detail here, reporting that there is video of this interaction where Gutierrez allegedly runs up to the officer saying, "What's up, fool? And I'll shoot you." You have apparent family members that were around. Officers forced him to the ground. They handcuffed him. They arrest him. And that is when Gutierrez allegedly claims that his girlfriend was hanging out with another man, even allegedly drops a racial slur. He was facing a felony intimidation charge, but over the summer he apparently entered into a plea deal where he pleads no contest to a lesser misdemeanor charge of resisting a public officer. He was ordered to undergo 8 hours of impulse control counseling, actually finished those sessions in September. So Adrian, 2 questions here. Should he have been even on the road? Was there any legal mechanism where he should not have been allowed to be on the road driving? And 2, does any of that affect the current case? Does any of that potential evidence or any of those witnesses testify in this trial?
Yeah, I think possibly, for sure, it's going to affect the negotiations in this case, for sure. If there is an offer that is made, I can say that it is concerning, and there isn't anything that was legally in place because he was able to still drive the car and didn't have his license revoked. In Nevada, you have to be able to have 2 priors in order for that to happen, for it to be revoked. It sounds like from what you stated, he only had 1 of those. And I can tell you that for sure it is going to be a problem in this case. If the state wants to admit those prior bad acts, they're going to have to show that it's part of a common scheme, plan, or motive, or it's part of his intent, that somehow it is probative to prove the charges in this case. In my opinion, and I'm pretty sure that law enforcement has already done this, is dumping his phone data to know if there was any sort of, hostility between him and his girlfriend, to know if this was, a premeditated, if there was trouble in paradise. And then you will be able to get there. I think it's going to be a bit hard to use those acts. It just really is going to depend upon the judge. If you're going to use prior offenses where somebody was hit, comes into this, or clearly if he's got a road rage problem in particular, and that's the state's theory, then possibly they can put it in here. But they're going to have to be able to develop it, that there was some sort of, at least something set him off to the point to accelerate, and that he couldn't control the impulse to, drive recklessly.
Right. By the way, there was a little bit of mixed reporting on this. I know you looked at the court record. Maybe you have an answer. So it's being reported that he's due back in court in January for his arraignment. But then I saw that there might be even though you look at the court record, it says probable cause was found. but I saw that the judge had maybe scheduled a preliminary hearing for December 9th. But my understanding is under Nevada law, you can either present a case to a grand jury to see, if there's enough probable cause. You don't always have to go to a preliminary hearing. I don't know if you have a little bit of clarity on what hearing we can expect next and why, if it is true, why they would want to go for a preliminary hearing as opposed to a grand jury.
I personally think that they will go for a grand jury indictment. You are correct in that, yes, there are two ways to charge. You can charge by an indictment or you can charge by a complaint, and the complaint would go into a preliminary hearing. The grand jury indictment, I think, is probably what I would expect to happen. So if there is no preliminary hearing scheduled at the moment, I would say, or if it's kicked out very far in time, that kind of gives me some sign that they're going to go to the grand jury instead. And, one of those two things is going to happen. So you can have them simultaneously. So meaning if they're already in the grand jury and are going to present evidence, they'll keep the preliminary hearing date. So that way it's out there. And then once the indictment comes back, they'll dismiss the other case procedurally. So I would expect with two people that are severely injured, and you would have to be bringing them into court if they're able to talk, speak, and all of those things, and whatever sort of medical treatment they're having for their injuries. That's a lot. So I would think they want to make the victims comfortable, and the grand jury can give them more flexibility. And they're also not cross-examined by defense counsel.
And putting aside, by the way, just all the legal elements, going back to the human aspect of this story, Adeline was 11 weeks pregnant at the time of the crash. And I want to read you from a GoFundMe that was set up to raise funds for her funeral expenses. It says, quote, "We would like to ask for help to gather money that will help with funeral expenses. With heavy hearts, we ask you to please help out the family of Adeline Duran. She was involved in a terrible car accident that took place on November 18th, 2025, and unfortunately lost her life in a terrible way. She was also expecting. Please pray for her to be in peace. Her family is devastated. Anything helps. If you can find it in your hearts to donate anything, it will be greatly appreciated to help the family during such difficult times." And this is, by the way, what Jose Hernandez, the deputy chief of police, had to say, quote, "It's yet another reminder of how 10 families whose lives will be changed forever, 2 of which will not have their family members during the holidays." Really, really sad. Adrian Lobo, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.